Hey, Wellness Warriors, welcome to the Burnout Resolution Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Mylaine Riobé, and today we're diving deep into one of the hottest trends on the internet, parasite cleanses. We're going to talk about the cleanses themselves, what people are saying about them. We're going to talk about ivermectin, fenbendazole, and whether or not parasites actually cause cancer, as is widely claimed on the internet. I've had clients ask me about using ivermectin and fenbendazole, and we even had a listener comment on one of the podcasts asking for my thoughts on ivermectin. And I've had quite a few of my private clients come into my office suspecting that they had parasites because they were having symptoms that were quite typical for what we would associate with a parasite infection. Loose stools, constipation, bloating, fatigue, brain fog. Sound familiar? They're also the symptoms of burnout. The body's functions are interconnected. If you look up the symptoms of hypothyroidism, for example, or thyroid disease in general, you'll find that it overlaps quite widely with burnout symptoms. You'll see fatigue there, you'll see sleep disturbances there, brain fog, weight gain. If you look up IBS symptoms, you'll see the same symptoms there as well. Because the body's function is so interconnected, whatever you think you have is probably what you're going to think you have after you look it up online. But that doesn't mean that's actually the root cause of what you do have. So I often have people say that they think they have parasites. And when we test them, we see that they don't have parasites, but they do have other conditions. So we'll find the root causes of their symptoms, but it's usually not parasites. And yet we see influencers and even celebrities claim that everyone has parasites, and so why not just do these cleanses all the time? And it's simply not true. Now, people think that doing these cleanses is fairly harmless, but they're not. And I've had some private clients express feeling much, much worse after doing a parasite cleanse. In fact, one of the young ladies that just came in a little over a month ago had done a parasite cleanse thinking she had parasites, and she actually ended up feeling far worse after the cleanse. And we'll talk about why that happens during the podcast today. And when we tested, we realized that it wasn't parasites that she actually had SIBO. Now, that doesn't mean that no one has parasites. We don't want to go to the opposite end of that spectrum. However, parasite infections are far less common than other potential causes of those symptoms, such as SIBO. SIBO, in fact, is much, much more common. So what's going on with these parasite cleanses? How do they get so popular, and why is everyone thinking they need to do one? One reason is we do them for our pets. For anyone who's ever had a puppy, we deworm our dogs once a month. And so we're kind of carrying that trend over to humans because everyone is scrambling, trying to find the root causes of their symptoms. Tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of Americans just don't feel well. They're tired, they're bloated, they're experiencing brain fog, weight gain, gastrointestinal symptoms like diarrhea, constipation, sleep disturbances, anxiety, and everyone is scrambling for answers. So the parasite cleanse frenzy started with a gentleman named Joe Tippens, who claimed to have cured his stage 4 lung cancer using parasite cleanses. Now, what they failed to disclose is that he was also using a very powerful immunotherapy drug called Keytruda at the time. And that particular immunotherapy drug has been shown to cause full remission of cancer in about 4 to 10% of cases. And so, not knowing this piece of the information, people thought that the parasite cleanses were what cured him. And so this started people down the slippery slope of believing that parasite cleanses were an anti-cancer fix. We're going to unpack exactly what is going on with this trend and how you can determine if you need a parasite cleanse or not. Unpacking this is complex because while it's true that there are certain types of parasites that have been linked with cancer, so for example, bile duct cancer is thought to be linked to a particular parasite infection. The trick, though, is that parasite is not found in the West. And that's the case for the other forms of cancer that are linked to parasite infections as well, is they're simply not found here in the West. They're found in Southeast Asia and parts of Africa. The parasites that tend to be isolated here in the West are not associated with cancer. So the most common forms of parasites that we'll diagnose are blastocystis and giardia. Now, while they can cause symptoms, they are not linked to cancer. And the reason why, even if someone who has that parasite infection were to, say, travel from Southeast Asia or Africa into the United States, and it still wouldn't be an issue, is because the ecosystem that would keep those parasites alive and duplicating don't exist here. Those parasites cannot survive in this environment in the West. And so there really is no fundamental logic behind the idea that in the West, parasites cause cancer. So the idea of just indiscriminately doing a parasite cleanse just because it's something to stay healthy is fundamentally flawed. Now, of course, I'm an advocate for testing, right? Make sure that you get tested. The parasites that we would most commonly find here are fairly easy to diagnose. Now, sometimes that requires blood work, looking for very specific testing for very specific parasites. And often we can also do what we call DNA testing of the stool to find parasites. Now, that's not to say that parasites don't have their dangers. They do. They can cause very distressful symptoms. And so you definitely want to know if you have parasites and then treat them appropriately. Parasites are fairly easy to kill. They're extremely susceptible to natural antimicrobials as well as even antibiotics. But the idea of simply doing a cleanse just because can be dangerous, especially if you're doing that cleanse with ivermectin or fenbendazole. Now, there are natural antimicrobials that can be used, and we use them in the treatment of SIBO. So SIBO, again, stands for small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and that is much, much more common than parasite infections. And so the problem is if you do a parasite cleanse thinking you have parasites because you have loose stools and constipation and all your tests were normal, you're more likely to have SIBO than actual parasites. And the parasite cleanses are usually by themselves not effective against SIBO. Now, although they contain many of the ingredients that we would use, so obviously we will not use ivermectin and fenbendazole to treat SIBO, but there are natural antimicrobials such as what we might find in a parasite cleanse. So for example, wormwood or artemisia, berberine, and other ingredients are often found in the protocols that were studied for SIBO. However, in order to treat SIBO, you need a much longer treatment. And very often that first antimicrobial treatment doesn't do the trick. And we have to use multiple protocols before we get anywhere with SIBO. And you want that to be guided. You don't want to make assumptions about SIBO because SIBO is, in fact, quite dangerous. And although it's not been specifically linked to cancer yet, most experts that have a lot of experience with SIBO can see the fundamental link between SIBO and cancer. SIBO's already been linked to several chronic diseases, and it's just a matter of time before we do link it to cancer. SIBO does something that parasites don't do, and that is block your absorption of your nutrients. SIBO also causes tremendous disruption of the microbiome. Now, parasites can also do that, but most parasites don't cause frank malabsorption like SIBO does. And while parasites can cause malabsorption, it's usually not as severe and chronic as that caused by SIBO. So SIBO can really deplete nutrients over time and is a completely different beast than a parasite infection. SIBO bacteria can literally deactivate mechanisms of absorption and will compete with you for your food and your nutrients. Parasites don't quite work that way. Parasites can damage the small intestine and the villi, causing malabsorption in that way. Because the small intestine is so redundant and long, parasite infections with the mechanism that they cause the malabsorption with tend not to be as severe as SIBO, where the bacteria are literally deactivating your mechanism of absorbing. That's different than the episodic damage that occurs in the small intestine. So small intestine is 20-25 feet long. If there's some damage to villi and pockets, you're not going to have as much malabsorption as if your mechanism of absorbing has been deactivated. That's different. So this is why we see nutrient depletion is far more severe in SIBO clients than we do see with Parasite. If you're not actually diagnosing SIBO and treating specifically for SIBO and you're just doing indiscriminate parasite cleanses, even if you're using antimicrobials that are thought to be fairly harmless, you're not going to get anywhere. You're not actually going to successfully treat the SIBO, which is the main culprit. And also, parasite cleanses they're draining. And so if you are already depleted, which is not uncommon in SIBO clients, they're already depleted by the time we diagnose them. And if you're doing a cleanse, it's really important to know that you're not already depleted, because then you're depleting yourself even more. And you can actually make yourself sicker, which is what happened to my client who came in a little over a month ago. So it's really important to diagnose the SIBO with a breath test and then find out how depleted you are. Are you depleted of nutrients? Are you depleted of hormones? Because SIBO causes hormone imbalances as well, that again, we don't necessarily see with parasite infections. Know the bug, right? Know thy bug. That's number one. Is it truly a parasite or is it SIBO? Number two, know how to do the cleanse, because if you're only doing a couple weeks, or sometimes they recommend that people stay on these things like forever. There are some people that are irresponsibly recommending that people do these cleanses just all the time. Now, because cleanses are draining, they require metabolic support from your body in order to be A, effective, and B, not to wear you down. If you're doing this for extended periods of time, you're going to wear your metabolism out. You're going to burn yourself out. And this is what happened to my client. Now, of course, we're rebuilding her metabolism, and now she understands that she didn't have a parasite, that it was SIBO, and that she was cleansing herself or detoxing and draining herself out without knowing that she was depleted. And so it's really important to balance the depletion and to make sure you know what nutrients are missing, what hormones are missing, so that you are supporting those things so that the body can keep up with the cleanse, if that makes sense. Now, we don't necessarily call SIBO treatments cleanses, but they do have a bit of a draining aspect to them, which is why some people have what we call die-off reactions when we treat. So they're not necessarily side effects of the medication or the antimicrobials themselves, but they are a sign that the person is a bit depleted and the body's systems can't handle the draining aspects of the treatments. This is why it's super important to be under supervised care when you're doing anything of that nature. So let's talk about ivermectin and fenbendazole, because when I'm scrolling on my social media, I'm constantly seeing ads for that. And again, it's so misleading because it's promising to prevent cancer. Let's unpack that. So fenbendazole is a dog dewormer and became very popular when a gentleman named Joe Tippens claimed that he cured his cancer with it. He was also on an immunotherapy drug that has been shown to cause remission in 4 to 10% of patients. We'll never really know if it was the immunotherapy drug that caused the remission or if it was the fenbendazole. Now, there are no clinical studies on fenbendazole and cancer therapy. While there might be some potentially theoretical mechanisms of action of fenbendazole against cancer, it's not FDA approved for human use. And the link between the parasites and the cancer, again, the irony of ivermectin and fenbendazole is they don't even kill the types of parasites that have been linked to cancer. Ivermectin and fenbendazole both kill the types of parasites called nematodes or roundworms. Those are not the parasites that have been linked to cancer. The parasites that have actually been linked to cancer are called trematodes, not nematodes. Trematodes are more like flukes. And again, they require types of snails and aquatic species that are just not found in Western waters. They cannot maintain their life cycles here. Even if someone travels here who is infected by these parasites, they can't really pass them on to anyone. There's no real way that these parasites are contagious, in other words. Ivermectin and fenbendazole don't kill these parasites at all. They are not effective against them. Now, they do work better on the types of parasites that we do find here in our animals. So dogs, for example, are susceptible to roundworms. This is why fenbendazole is used in dogs for deworming, because they're actually quite common in dogs. Now, there are certain infections where ivermectin is indicated for human use, such as scabies and head lice, for example. But there is no role for ivermectin or fenbendazole for cancer prevention. So I just want to be very clear. You will not be preventing your cancer using ivermectin or fenbendazole. And unlike natural antimicrobials that are not directly harmful to humans, ivermectin and fenbendazole are harmful to humans. There can also be kidney failure with the use of these drugs. And when used together, their potential toxicities can be even worse. The bottom line is people are wiping out the wrong parasites trying to prevent their cancers and potentially harming their livers, kidneys, and their nervous systems unnecessarily. The hype about parasites causing cancer, at least here in the West, is all hype and no substance. And even the antimicrobials, right? So people might say, okay, so I won't use the ivermectin or the fenbendazole, but how about I use the natural antimicrobials? The answer to that question is, again, know what you're trying to kill. First of all, you want to know, do I have a GI parasite, a yeast infection, or do I have SIBO? Because it matters, because the treatments are different. Many people who think they have parasites do, again, end up having SIBO or maybe even yeast in their gut. Now, that doesn't mean we don't catch parasites here and there, we do, but not nearly at the same frequency as we do SIBO. And again, SIBO is a much, much more dangerous condition to have. And using those natural antimicrobials, if you're not using them in the proper ways, and if you're not using them in the ways that were studied to actually treat SIBO, you might be spitting in the wind and not really getting anywhere. The other thing about SIBO is very often biofilms are involved. And while the natural cleanses can penetrate biofilms to some extent, they can't really penetrate really thick biofilms. Again, you want to make sure that you are under an integrative medical doctor or functional medical doctor supervision if you suspect that you have SIBO, or if you suspect you have parasites, because it's very likely to be SIBO. So in order to really have a complete SIBO treatment, if that is in fact what you have, you need to know if you have biofilms, you need to know what nutrient deficiencies you also have. And again, that will not show up in your blood work. A lot of people are misled into thinking that they don't really have nutrient deficiencies when they do, and they just feel horrible, and they think that these cleanses are the solution, and then they feel worse. Sometimes they do feel better temporarily, and then they feel worse again because it's not the fix. And so now the recommendation is, well, just keep doing it, right? And so what you're doing is you're harming yourself over time. So even natural things can be harmful if they are overutilized, underutilized, inappropriately utilized. You want to be very cautious that you're not overdoing things or underdoing things. SIBO treatment protocols can be anywhere from 4 to 12 weeks long, depending on the protocol. But we don't use them any longer than is necessary because their overutilization can wear out your metabolism. When your metabolism gets worn out, that backfires on you because now your immune system gets worn out and now you may be placing yourself at risk for other conditions. And that's another thing I forgot to touch on about ivermectin, fenbendazole, and just doing indiscriminate parasite cleanses is those parasite treatments can also wipe out favorable parasites. Just like there are favorable bacteria in our bodies that we actually need for proper body function, there are also parasites that are friendly to us that actually control the immune system responses and prevent autoimmune conditions. This is another danger of just indiscriminately using ivermectin and fenbendazole. Autoimmune conditions are actually less in environments where those favorable parasites are seen more. So again, you don't want to just indiscriminately kill parasites without knowing exactly who you're trying to kill. Back to the natural agent. With the natural antimicrobials, what we're talking about is like black walnut, wormwood, berberine, oregano. These are essentially herbs and spices, essential oils that are fairly harmless on the surface. But again, using them too much you can wear yourself down and it can backfire. There is such a thing as wearing your immune system and your metabolism out so much that you can have autoimmune conditions occur as a result of that. So everything is always about balance. It's about maintaining the balance of the body in general. This is where knowing your dynamic metabolic type before you do anything that's draining is really important. So if you have a deficient dynamic metabolic type, you're the one that's most likely to have vitamin, mineral, and even hormone deficiencies, antioxidant deficiencies. If you have an excess dynamic metabolic type, you're more likely to tolerate a cleanse without the untoward side effects as someone who is more depleted or has a deficient dynamic metabolic type. The other thing about parasite cleanses, if you do them for too long, you don't allow the gut to actually restore itself. And that's a huge part of healing. So you've cleansed them out and detoxed and all that. There's all this collateral damage inevitably that's happening as a result of cleansing. And so it's really important to allow restoration. And if you're doing these indiscriminate cleanses, you're not allowing for that. And there are very specific recommendations that we make to help people restore the gut. In other words, to correct the dysbiosis or the imbalance of the microbiome, to restore the lining of the gastrointestinal system itself. So many people will develop leaky gut as a result of SIBO and other types of gastrointestinal abnormalities. And so making sure that lining is restored is critically important to prevent just all kinds of junk from spilling into your body, overburdening your liver, and then spilling into the rest of you, so to speak, causing inflammation and potentially autoimmune conditions, arthritis, rashes, headaches, and all types of other symptoms that come as a result of that. Also, supporting GI motility, making sure that we're restoring the ability of the muscular system of the gastrointestinal system, making sure that its function is restored is really important. Making sure you have enough stomach acid, really important. Like all of these things are not discussed with these indiscriminate recommendations for parasite cleanses, and often people are left to their own devices not knowing what to do. Which brings us to the next segment, yeast. So yeast infections are also far more common than parasites, especially here in the United States and in the West in general. So again, ivermectin, fenbendazole do not treat yeast. Now, the natural antimicrobials do have some antifungal properties, but again, if you don't know what you're treating, you won't know what duration of therapy is essential. And also, you want to have a test before and after so that you know that you used the right thing for the right amount of time and that particular bug is actually gone, whether it's a yeast infection, a parasite, SIBO, whatever it is. Then go into the restoration phase. So ivermectin, fenbendazole, zero impact on yeast. Yeast can be dangerous. Yeast can also cause inflammation and all types of complications. So those same symptoms that lead people to believe that they have parasites are also the same symptoms associated with yeast infections and SIBO. So without testing, you have no means of knowing. Now, again, many people do try to get help. They'll go to a gastroenterologist, they'll go to their primary care physician. But again, because mainstream medicine has not yet appreciated the existence of SIBO, or even what we call yeast enteritis, right? So enteritis is an infection of the small intestine. Colitis would be more of the colon itself. So it's really essentially inflammation of the gastrointestinal system. When it's caused by yeast, we call it yeast enteritis. Very often not tested for or missed as a cause of those burnout symptoms, the fatigue, the brain fog, the weight gain, the sleep disturbances, the anxiety, the loose stools, the constipation, or any combination of the above. Yeast infections can cause autoimmune conditions, colitis, Crohn's disease, mood disorders, and metabolic issues. And so again, know the bug you're trying to kill. It's extremely important. You may not have any bugs, right? That's another possibility. It's not as common, but it's possible that you don't really have an infectious cause of your symptoms. It might just be toxins. There are other potential things, heavy metals, for example, and just garden variety everyday toxins that we're exposed to, microplastics, pesticides in food, All of these things can cause a lot of those overlapping symptoms that we talked about. Testing is extremely important, and functional testing is extremely important because very often the type of testing that's really necessary to dive deep into the gastrointestinal system to find things like SIBO and yeast infections in the gut and parasites are incompletely performed in mainstream medicine. And then there's the side effects of the treatments. Very often people are experiencing die-off reactions and think they're having side effects to a treatment. So what's a die-off reaction versus a side effect? A die-off reaction is when the treatment is actually working and it's actually killing the parasite or the bacteria or yeast that we're trying to kill, but it's overwhelming the body. Most of the time this occurs in someone with a deficient dynamic metabolic type. So someone with a deficient dynamic metabolic type is someone who will say, yeah, I wake up and I'm tired, and as the day goes by, I get even more tired. And I love naps. Naps really help. If I get to rest for a bit, I feel much better. They may say exercise actually makes me feel worse, or even I'm too tired to exercise. That's a deficient dynamic metabolic type. And again, if you've taken our 7-day challenge, you've done our burnout assessment, and you will know what your dynamic metabolic type is. There are 6 different dynamic metabolic types. 3 of them are of the deficient category, 3 of them are of the what we call excess category. So you have your hot, your cold, and your temperature neutral deficient, and you have your hot, cold, temperature neutral excess. People with an excess dynamic metabolic type will say, I feel worse if I sit still. I feel much better when I move. I love to exercise because I actually feel better. I hate naps because I feel worse when I wake up. Those are the people with the excess dynamic metabolic type. Excess, again, means something's extra. There's excess of things. Usually that's in the form of inflammation and toxins. That could be an infection. That could be heavy metals. That could be just garden variety junk or inflammation being generated by an infection. People with an excess dynamic metabolic type are going to tolerate the treatment better. They usually don't have as much die-off as someone with a deficient dynamic metabolic type because it's the overwhelm of the body that creates the symptoms. So while someone with an excess dynamic metabolic type might have like a little bit of die-off and then they hit the ground running and they keep going, someone with a deficient dynamic metabolic type might hit a wall. We've even had to stop and pull back on treatments for some people and wait until they were more supported to restart the treatments again, or to really slow walk them into the treatments so that they didn't overwhelm the body as much. What gets overwhelmed in a die-off reaction is your immune system and your detoxification system. So your liver is the primary detoxification organ for anything that goes through your gastrointestinal system. Your gastrointestinal system is a huge detoxification system as well. But when it's not functioning well because it's infected or damaged, you have a leaky gut where there are these little micro tears in the lining of the gut, which is very, very thin. When there are tears in there due to either toxins or infection, then things just spill into your body. Now, nothing's supposed to just spill into your body. Your body has all types of layers of defense to try to prevent that from happening because that's a relative emergency. You don't want like junk in your body because it goes right into your bloodstream. Anything that ends up in your bloodstream from the gastrointestinal system is your liver's problem. We call that first pass metabolism in medicine. That means anything that gets into your bloodstream has to be filtered through the liver first. But if you have a bunch of vitamin and mineral deficiencies because you've had SIBO for a long time, or perhaps you're not eating well and you're not eating sufficiently, a lot of people are doing intermittent fasting and they're depleting themselves. If that's the situation, that means your liver doesn't have access to those nutrients either. So the liver is somewhat depleted. And now, as the treatment is killing off a bunch of bacteria at the same time, and those bacteria are falling apart, disintegrating, or even if it's yeast or parasites, they're falling apart and disintegrating, inevitably some of that's going to spill into your body and not just be sequestered in the stool and come out that way. If you have a leaky gut and stuff is coming into the body and your liver is too depleted to perform the proper detoxification reactions to repackage those toxins and send them back out of your body, they're going to spill into your body. And this is what a die-off reaction actually is. People will say that, I think I'm coming down with the flu, I really don't feel well. Some people get chills, some people get fevers, some people have rashes. That's another big one. They get these red rashes, itching. Some other people say, I just got this weird fever out of the blue. Some people will get their already existing symptoms, but much worse. Some people will say, I felt even more tired. I felt like I had even more loose stools. My constipation got worse. I had even more bloating. I got even more heartburn. So these are all on the table for die-off reactions. I got headaches. Like, there's almost no limit to what symptoms can occur with a die-off reaction. The difference between side effects and die-off reactions is that die-off reactions are usually self-limited and usually occur towards the beginning of the treatment. So within the first couple of days, if someone's going to have a die-off reaction, that's when they start not feeling well. Die-off reactions are typically what we call self-limited, so they'll usually subside in about 3 to 5 days. So usually die-off reactions are limited to the first week of treatment, and then they just go away. Your body will scramble to try and catch up, and eventually it will catch up, and then it'll stay caught up. It's just that first like wave of junk that's coming at it out of the blue when it wasn't prepared that catches it by surprise and bowls it over. That's what a die-off reaction is. A side effect you could potentially have for the whole time you're using the treatment. And that is usually more like drug related. It's not a die-off reaction. It's not that it's working and the effect of it working is creating the symptoms. It's the actual drug causing a side effect. So this is where we get with fenbendazole and ivermectin, like liver toxicity. It's the drug itself that's causing the side effect and the problem and the toxicity. Now, that can be worsened if someone is more depleted. Or, for example, if you do have heavy metal toxins in your liver and your liver's already not working well, now you throw a drug on top of that, that has huge impacts on the liver because it stresses the liver out. We can see how that can lead to liver toxicity. The same thing can happen if the liver is depleted and doesn't have enough vitamins and minerals to function properly. And now you take a drug that has to be heavily metabolized by the liver. The other thing to know about fenbendazole in particular is it's artificial, it's synthetic, it's not a natural product. Anything that's not a natural product is going to put extensive pressure on your liver because your liver is not designed for things that are artificial. And so this is where the toxicity can come in as well. Ivermectin is what we call semi-synthetic. So it's not fully natural like oregano and berberine and wormwood and black walnut, for example. The semi-synthetic nature means, yes, it was produced with a natural product. In this case, it's actually a bacteria that is the basis of ivermectin, and then they synthesize it in the lab. It's not fully natural. That can create a little bit of pressure in your liver as well, which is why, again, ivermectin has some liver toxicity associated with it. Usually when someone has a GI issue, they also have a liver issue. And again, that will not show up in your blood work, right? So some people will say, yeah, my liver function went off for a little bit, then it went back to normal, and then it goes off again. That's a sign that the liver is struggling, it's not working well. If there's no obvious cause for that, for example, you don't have hepatitis, or you didn't have an alcoholic beverage a couple days before you did your testing, if there's no cause for the abnormality of the liver function, it's usually a sign that your liver is struggling on some level, even when the blood work goes back to normal. Remember that blood work doesn't show us a lot of these kind of under the surface cellular abnormalities that affect our health. But even with normal liver function, you can have poor liver function, believe it or not. Even with normal liver blood work, you can have abnormal liver function. By the time your blood work shows the abnormality, the dysfunction is fairly severe. And so there's this huge mismatch between blood work and what's actually going on in the cells of the organ itself. So how can you tell if you have liver stagnation or anything of that nature? A TCM diagnosis can tell you, and some of your symptoms. So bloating is actually a liver sign. If you have floaters in your vision, that's a liver sign. Very often people say, I have floaters. I went to my optometrist and they said they couldn't find anything. Well, in traditional Chinese medicine, the eye is the external manifestation of the liver. And so anything that goes on in the eye is literally telling you what's going on inside in your liver. So if your eyes are red, for example, or dry, you want to match that with your tongue and pulse assessment so you know exactly what the pattern is. Dizziness also, especially postural dizziness, can be a sign of liver deficiency. Bloating is another sign of liver disharmony in TCM or traditional Chinese medicine. And so the tongue and pulse will really help you to nail down what the actual pattern is in the liver, and that will help the practitioner then support the liver in whatever way it needs to be supported. Sometimes what we'll see is the tongue may look completely pink and normal, and yet the pulse is what we call thin and wiry, especially in women. And so the thin and wiry pulse is also a sign of liver deficiency and stagnation. Sometimes we'll see the tongue kind of red. There might be a greasy coating on it. That's a sign of acidity. So that means the liver is not functioning well and it's allowing acids to build up. And that's sometimes where we'll see the red eyes as well. So there are ways to know if your liver is not functioning optimally, even if your blood work is normal. But the vast majority of the time, anyone who has any significant gastrointestinal issue will very likely have some liver abnormalities that, again, a TCM practitioner can support. So I often support my clients with Chinese herbs, nutrients, depending on cellular-based testing to show what those nutrient deficiencies are. And then we'll support them with those supplements so that the liver has access to those nutrients while we're supporting digestion and absorption. That's another piece of the puzzle that's missing with these parasite cleanses is if you really do have a GI abnormality and it's impacting your absorption, you want to know if that's actually happening because just using parasite cleanses does not restore your absorption. So you want to make sure that you're not missing digestive enzymes. You want to make sure that you're not protein depleted, fat depleted. Those are essential for proper body function. So it's not just a matter of take a cleanse and if it doesn't work, just keep taking it. Right? It's way more complicated than that. And I do understand why people go to those lengths to try to feel better because our mainstream model just doesn't have the answers. And many people don't know that they can turn to a functional or integrative medical doctor or even a Chinese medicine practitioner for support. So while Chinese medicine doesn't recognize SIBO specifically, they can recognize the patterns that are underlying the GI abnormalities and help support. And when you combine that with functional testing, actually doing the test that shows you if you have the SIBO, if you have the malabsorption, if you have the nutrient deficiencies, right? When we combine those two disciplines together, it's extremely powerful. And that's why I studied Chinese medicine and functional medicine, because I realized that very early in my career. Like those two systems, when they're used together, are extremely powerful. And then if you have regular medicine, sometimes we need to write a prescription for something, or somebody has a rip-roaring bladder infection, like there's no Chinese herb that's going to fix that. There's no acupuncture for that. There's no natural treatment for a rip-roaring bladder infection. That's an antibiotic, right? So when you do all three, you get this multi-dimensional view of people's health, and you get to see the path out of whatever, jam that they feel that they're in. And so if you go to your mainstream physician and you don't find answers, go to a functional medical doctor, go to a Chinese medicine practitioner. That will get you started along the right path to find those answers that you're looking for without having to resort to thinking that you need to do it on your own. You don't have to do this alone. We're here to support. And again, remember, everything is about balance. So going full steam ahead with one methodology very often backfires. And again, traditional Chinese medicine teaches us this. Many of these natural antimicrobials are Chinese herbs, and so they have energy associated with them. And if you don't know what that energy is doing, you may go off the deep end with it. And so in traditional Chinese medicine, we learn that everything has toxicity just by its nature, right? So if all you're doing is using one single herb all the time or a narrow cocktail of herbs all the time that have a draining impact, eventually that will get you, right? That's the toxicity. The toxicity is you're going to wear the system out. So in Chinese medicine, it's always about balance. It's about restoring the balance in the body. And so if you're too depleted and you're doing a cleanse, you need to have that support so that the cleanse doesn't damage the body further. So in my own practice, sometimes what I recommend to clients who've had SIBO, so we've diagnosed it, we've treated it, we've restored the gut, and now we're on defense mode, right? So we know that SIBO can recur. That's the Achilles heel of treating SIBO, is that it is stress related. And stress tends to create the perfect environment for SIBO to actually occur. This is why we don't often see just yeast or just parasites. We actually see SIBO coexisting with them, because SIBO is usually that first thing that happens. And then the yeast, the parasites, even H. pylori, they're just tagging along because the system is so imbalanced that they can survive in the environment. And so usually it's SIBO that is allowing the chaos to actually happen. So it is stress induced, which means it can recur. I will sometimes recommend to my clients twice a year or so to use a shorter version of a SIBO treatment protocol to just try to prevent it from coming back. But only if they've actually been diagnosed with SIBO, not indiscriminately. Under my guided recommendation, once we've done everything to restore the gut, I do make some recommendations to use some specific natural antimicrobials a couple times a year, and to also have a lot of vigilance over the recurrence of SIBO or the recurrence of those symptoms: loose stools, bloating, constipation, heartburn, nausea, feeling full, losing your appetite. Like, all of these things are signs that the gastrointestinal system is not functioning well. And again, normal bowel movements, normal stool looks like a ripe banana, like the consistency of a ripe banana, but brown and about the same length as a banana. That's a normal bowel movement. You should have 2 to 3 normal bowel movements daily. Some of the things that we teach our clients is what a normal bowel movement actually is. And so many people think that whatever they had when they were a kid is normal. I have some clients that say, no, my bowel movements are fine. I go every other day. And that's normal for me because that's just always how I've been. And then we have to literally teach them that, no, that is not normal. 2 to 3 times a day is normal. And that's when they realize, oh, this has been going on this long. It is important for people to know what is a normal bowel movement. You shouldn't have to strain to move your bowels. They should not be loose. If it's any looser than a ripe banana, then that's not normal. And you should not have bloating after you eat, unless, you're eating some fast food somewhere that no one can really actually digest, right? So then maybe you might have some rumbles in your tummy. But aside from that, if you're eating a reasonably healthy diet, you should not have bloating after you eat, or heartburn. These very subtle signs are actually not very subtle. They're a sign of potentially infection coming back. Having this hypervigilance so that you're tested again, because if all you're doing is using a short course of a SIBO treatment protocol for prevention, when you actually have SIBO, it's not going to work. We need to actually go full force with full protocols again and make sure that it's gone. So we will repeat testing periodically as we're using different studied protocols for SIBO to make sure that it's gone. These are things that are important to know because you need to be under supervision to navigate this minefield safely so that you are actually restoring proper gut function so that your metabolism can work optimally and you can stay out of burnout. So that's all the time we have for today's podcast. I hope you found this helpful and useful. If you want to know more about your dynamic metabolic type, I invite you to join our 7-day Burnout Reset Challenge. We'll show you how to determine your dynamic metabolic type and start using it immediately to start getting yourself out of burnout. We've had amazing results with our 7-day challenge, really laying the groundwork for people to start to feel better and reset their metabolism. So if you want to join, links in the description. You can also visit our website, awakenedwellnessnow.com, to learn more. And if you want to know about our corporate programs, check out our website as well. If you know anyone who's thinking about doing a parasite cleanse, please share this podcast so that they can learn more and make an informed decision. Please like, share, and subscribe. So as always, thank you for listening. And until next time, many, many blessings. Thank you.